The morning sun cast long shadows across the private aviation terminal as Dr. Maya Richardson pulled up in her sleek black Mercedes. At 42 years old, she carried herself with the confidence that came from years of proving herself in operating rooms and hospital boardrooms. Her dark curly hair was pulled back neatly, and her navy blue pantsuit spoke of success without trying too hard to show it. Maya checked her watch, 7:45 a.m. She was early, just as she liked to be. The Boston Medical Conference wouldn't start until tomorrow morning, but she always preferred arriving a day early to prepare. Her presentation on breakthrough neurological procedures wasn't going to present itself. As she gathered her designer laptop bag and small carry-on suitcase from the car, Maya couldn't help but smile. Just 15 years ago, she had been a nervous resident, working endless hours and dreaming of making a real difference in medicine. Now, she was one of the top neurosurgeons in the country, with a success rate that made other doctors take notice. The parking lot was quiet, with only a few expensive cars scattered around, the usual scene at a private aviation terminal. Maya had started using private flights 3 years ago, not because she wanted to show off, but because time had become her most precious resource. When you're the person hospitals call for the most difficult brain surgeries, every minute counts. Walking toward the terminal entrance, Maya mentally reviewed her schedule. Land in Boston by 10 a.m., check into the Four Seasons, review her presentation one last time, and maybe even squeeze in a quick lunch with her old college roommate who now taught at Harvard Medical School. Everything was planned perfectly, as usual. The glass doors of the terminal slid open smoothly, releasing a blast of cool air conditioning. Inside, the space was modern and minimalist, all clean lines and soft lighting. A few other travelers sat in plush leather chairs, some typing on laptops, others talking quietly on phones. This was Maya's world now, though sometimes she still felt like that little girl from Detroit who used to read medical books under her blanket with a flashlight. At the main desk, Maya reached into her bag for her identification and flight documents. Her fingers brushed against the small photo she always carried, her parents at her medical school graduation, their faces beaming with pride. They had worked multiple jobs to help put her through school, and their sacrifice fueled her drive every single day. "Good morning," Maya said to the receptionist, her voice carrying the warm professionalism she had perfected over years of dealing with patients and their families. She placed her documents on the counter, everything organized just so, her pilot-approved ID, her flight confirmation, and her medical credentials that she always carried out of habit. The receptionist, a young woman with bright red hair, looked up and started to smile, then froze. It was a familiar pause, one Maya had seen countless times before. That split second when people realized she wasn't who they were expecting to see walking into a private aviation terminal. Behind the counter, a security guard looked up from his newspaper. Thomas Wells, according to his name tag, was a tall man with graying hair and a face that had settled into permanent lines of suspicion. His eyes narrowed as he took in Maya's appearance, and she could feel the situation starting to shift. Maya kept her expression neutral, her posture relaxed but dignified. She had worked too hard and come too far to let moments like these ruffle her. In her mind, she could hear her mother's voice. "Baby, you carry yourself like you belong anywhere you want to be, because you do." The air in the terminal seemed to grow thicker as Wells pushed back his chair and stood up. Maya noticed how his hand rested near his security badge, how his eyes lingered too long on her expensive bags, as if trying to spot something fake about them. What happened next would become a story told in break rooms and boardrooms, on social media and news channels. But right then, in that quiet morning moment, Dr. Maya Richardson simply stood tall, her credentials laid out before her, ready to face whatever came next with the same grace and strength that had carried her from a working-class neighborhood in Detroit to the top of her field. Little did security guard Wells know, he was about to learn a powerful lesson about judging books by their covers, and about the quiet power that some people carry not in their uniforms, but in their achievements. Security guard Thomas Wells stepped out from behind the counter, his boots making heavy sounds on the polished floor. He walked toward Dr. Maya Richardson with the kind of slow swagger that came from 20 years of working security and thinking he owned every inch of the terminal. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside," Wells said, his voice carrying across the quiet terminal. A few travelers looked up from their phones and laptops, curious about the developing scene. His hand still rested near his badge, as if he was dealing with a threat instead of a renowned doctor. Maya remained calm, though she noticed her heart beating a little faster. She had faced situations like this before, but they never got easier. "Is there a problem with my documentation?" she asked, her voice steady and professional. She gestured to her perfectly organized papers on the counter. Wells barely glanced at the documents. Instead, he looked at Maya's expensive suit, her designer bags, and her confident stance with growing suspicion. "Yeah, there's a problem," he said, crossing his arms. "We need to verify these credentials. Private flights are for authorized passengers only." The young receptionist with red hair looked uncomfortable, her eyes moving between Maya's documents and Wells' stern face. "Sir," she started to say, "her paperwork appears to be in order." "I'll handle this, Jenny." Wells cut her off sharply. He turned back to Maya. "Who exactly are you claiming to be?" Maya took a slow, deep breath. She thought about the 3 surgeries she had performed just last week, saving lives that other doctors had given up on. She thought about the medical students who asked for her autograph after her lectures. She thought about her mother's words about carrying herself with dignity. "I am Dr. Maya Richardson," she said clearly, making sure everyone in the terminal could hear her. "I'm the head of neurosurgery at Metropolitan General Hospital, and I have a chartered flight waiting to take me to a medical conference in Boston where I'm the keynote speaker." A few other employees had gathered nearby, watching the scene unfold. One of them, a younger security guard, whispered something to his colleague while looking at his phone, probably looking up Maya's name. Wells laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "Right, and I'm the President of the United States." He picked up Maya's pilot-approved ID, holding it like it might be fake. "You expect me to believe you're a brain surgeon?" The terminal had grown very quiet. A businessman in an expensive suit had stopped typing on his laptop to watch. 2 flight attendants stood near the coffee machine, whispering and frowning at Wells' behavior. Maya reached into her bag, her movements deliberate and calm. She pulled out her phone and her hospital ID badge, complete with her photo and the gold trim that marked her as a department head. "Mr. Wells," she said, her voice carrying the same tone she used when teaching medical students, "I understand you're doing your job. But I suggest you look very carefully at my credentials before you continue with this line of questioning." Wells' face reddened. "Anyone can get fake IDs these days," he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. The younger security guard who had been checking his phone approached Wells and tried to whisper something in his ear. "Not now." Wells snapped at him, waving him away. He turned back to Maya. "I'm going to need to call the charter company, and maybe the hospital too. Can't be too careful these days, you understand." Maya smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that suggested she had been saving her strongest move for last. "Please do," she said, pulling out her phone. "In fact, let me help you with that. I have the hospital board chairman on speed dial. He's also a major investor in this aviation company." The younger guard tried again. "Sir, I really think you should." "What?" Wells turned to him, irritated. "I just Googled Dr. Richardson," the young guard said, his voice carrying in the quiet terminal. "She was on the cover of Medical Innovation Monthly last year. She's famous." The atmosphere in the terminal shifted. Several people had their phones out now, recording the scene. Wells stood frozen, realizing too late that he had made a serious mistake in judgment. But Dr. Maya Richardson wasn't done yet. She had already pressed the speed dial on her phone, and someone important was about to answer. The real showdown was just beginning. The phone in Maya's hand rang twice before a deep voice answered on speaker. "Maya, I was just thinking about your presentation tomorrow." The voice belonged to James Harrison, chairman of the Metropolitan Hospital Board and a man known for his influence in both medical and business circles. Wells' face turned an even darker shade of red as Maya held the phone where everyone could hear. "Good morning, James," she said calmly. "I'm actually at the private terminal right now, and we seem to have a situation that requires your attention." The chairman's voice turned serious. "What's going on?" Before Maya could answer, Wells tried to save face. He stepped forward, raising his voice to be heard over the phone. "Sir, this is Security Officer Thomas Wells. We're just following standard procedures to verify." "Who is this?" Harrison interrupted sharply. "Maya, are you being delayed?" "Yes, James. Officer Wells here doesn't believe I'm really Dr. Maya Richardson. He thinks my IDs are fake and that I'm trying to illegally board a private flight. Maya's voice remained professional, but everyone in the terminal could hear the steel beneath her calm words. There was a moment of silence on the phone. When Harrison spoke again, his voice had the kind of coldness that made powerful people nervous. "Officer Wells, do you realize who you're speaking to? Dr. Richardson is not only our head of neurosurgery, but also one of the most respected doctors in the country." Wells shifted uncomfortably on his feet. The young guard who had Googled Maya earlier was now standing near the wall, shaking his head. The red-haired receptionist, Jenny, had covered her face with her hands, clearly embarrassed by the whole situation. But Wells, despite realizing his mistake, decided to dig himself deeper. "Sir, we get all kinds of people trying to sneak into private flights. How was I supposed to know?" "How were you supposed to know?" Harrison's voice boomed through the phone speaker. "Perhaps by reading her perfectly valid credentials, or by doing a simple check like your younger colleague did. Instead, you chose to make assumptions based on what exactly, Officer Wells?" The terminal was dead quiet now. Everyone knew what Harrison was implying. A woman in a business suit who had been watching the whole scene spoke up from her seat. "I've been flying from this terminal for 5 years," she said loudly. "I've never once been asked to verify my credentials like this." More voices joined in. "Me neither," said a man in golf clothes. "They usually just check our IDs and wave us through." Wells looked around, suddenly realizing he had an audience of angry high-profile travelers, all watching him try to humiliate a successful black woman who had every right to be there. His power trip was backfiring spectacularly. "Mr. Harrison," Maya spoke into the phone, her voice clear and controlled. "I have a flight to catch, and I'd hate to be late for tomorrow's conference. Perhaps we could discuss implementing better training procedures for the security staff another time." "Oh, we'll definitely be having that discussion," Harrison replied. "Officer Wells, consider yourself." "James," Maya interrupted gently, "maybe this can be a learning opportunity instead." She looked directly at Wells, who now couldn't meet her eyes. "Sometimes the best way to fight prejudice is through education, not punishment." A murmur of approval went through the watching crowd. Even some of those who had been filming the incident lowered their phones, impressed by Maya's grace under pressure. The terminal manager finally arrived, rushing through the door with panic on his face. He had clearly been informed about the situation. "Dr. Richardson," he said, slightly out of breath, "please accept our deepest apologies. Let me escort you to your flight personally." Maya nodded to the manager but turned back to Wells one last time. The security guard stood there, his earlier arrogance replaced by shame as he realized his actions would have consequences far beyond this morning. "Officer Wells," Maya said, picking up her bags, "I hope the next time you see someone who doesn't fit your image of success, you'll remember this moment." She smiled, but her eyes were serious. "After all, you never know who might be saving your life in the operating room one day." With those words hanging in the air, Maya followed the manager toward the private flight area, leaving behind a changed atmosphere in the terminal and a security guard who had learned a powerful lesson about prejudice and power. As the terminal manager led Maya toward the private flight area, the tension in the building only grew stronger. Behind them, voices rose in angry discussion about what everyone had just witnessed. Wells stood rooted to his spot, his face a mix of embarrassment and anger, while other employees whispered and pointed. Dr. Richardson, the manager, whose name tag read Robert Turner, spoke quickly as they walked. "I can't tell you how sorry I am about this incident. Officer Wells has worked here for 20 years, but this behavior is completely unacceptable." Sweat beaded on his forehead as he talked, clearly worried about the consequences of this morning's events. Maya adjusted her laptop bag on her shoulder, her heels clicking steadily on the polished floor. "Mr. Turner," she said, "what concerns me isn't just Officer Wells. It's the system that made him feel comfortable enough to act this way." Before Turner could respond, a commotion erupted behind them. Wells' voice boomed across the terminal. "This isn't over. We still need to verify everything." He was marching toward them, his face red with wounded pride, clearly unable to accept his defeat gracefully. Several travelers stood up from their seats, phones still recording. The woman in the business suit who had spoken up earlier stepped forward. "Are you seriously still pursuing this?" she asked Wells in disbelief. Jenny, the red-haired receptionist, rushed out from behind her desk. "Officer Wells, please stop. We've already confirmed Dr. Richardson's identity." But Wells wasn't listening. 20 years of unchecked authority had convinced him he couldn't be wrong. Maya turned around slowly, her calm demeanor a sharp contrast to Wells' agitation. The terminal manager stepped between them, holding up his hands. "Officer Wells, stand down immediately," Turner ordered, his voice shaking slightly. But Wells was past listening to reason. "I've spent 2 decades protecting this terminal," he said loudly. "I've caught dozens of people trying to sneak in. Just because she has some fancy phone calls and Google results doesn't mean—" "Enough." The sharp voice came from the young security guard who had Googled Maya earlier. His name tag read, Officer David Chen. He stepped forward, positioning himself next to Maya. "This has gone too far, Wells. You're embarrassing yourself and this entire facility." More employees gathered around, creating a clear divide. On one side stood Wells, alone in his prejudice. On the other stood Maya, supported by Chen, Turner, and a growing crowd of witnesses. Maya reached into her bag and pulled out something that made everyone stop, a small, framed photo. In it, she stood in an operating room, holding up a young girl who was smiling brightly. "Officer Wells," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent terminal, "this is Sarah. She was 8 years old when every doctor said her brain tumor was inoperable. Everyone told her parents to prepare for the worst." She held up the photo where Wells could see it clearly. "I spent 14 hours in surgery saving her life. I didn't stop when people said it couldn't be done. I didn't let anyone tell me what I could or couldn't achieve." Her voice remained steady, but her eyes blazed with quiet intensity. "And I certainly won't let you stop me from boarding a flight I'm fully authorized to take." The impact of her words was visible on every face in the terminal. Several people wiped tears from their eyes. Even Jenny at the reception desk was openly crying. Wells stood frozen, staring at the photo of the smiling girl. For the first time, real shame crept into his expression as he realized he wasn't just confronting a passenger. He was trying to block a doctor who saved children's lives. The terminal manager seized this moment to take control. "Officer Wells, report to my office immediately." His voice was firm now, no longer shaking. "Dr. Richardson, please allow Officer Chen to escort you to your flight." As Chen stepped forward to lead the way, Maya carefully put the photo back in her bag. The crowd parted respectfully to let her pass. Behind her, Wells slowly walked toward the manager's office, his shoulders slumped in defeat. But this morning's drama wasn't over yet. As Maya and Chen approached the private flight area, Turner's voice rang out sharply. "Everyone, stay right where you are. The airline owner is on his way down. He wants to address this situation personally." The tension in the terminal rose again. This story was about to take another dramatic turn. Within 10 minutes, the atmosphere in the terminal changed dramatically. Richard Montgomery, the owner of Elite Airways, strode through the main entrance. At 65 years old, with silver hair and an expensive Navy suit, he commanded attention without saying a word. 2 corporate executives followed quickly behind him. Maya recognized Montgomery immediately. His photo often appeared in business magazines, and he had donated millions to various hospitals, including hers. What surprised her was that he had come personally instead of sending a representative. "Dr. Richardson," Montgomery said, walking straight to Maya with his hand extended. "I just got off the phone with James Harrison. To say I'm disturbed by what I'm hearing would be an understatement." His voice was calm, but carried the weight of someone used to solving big problems. Wells, who had been standing near the manager's office, seemed to shrink into himself as Montgomery glanced his way. The other travelers and staff watched in complete silence, knowing they were witnessing something important. "Mr. Montgomery," Maya responded, shaking his hand firmly. "I appreciate you coming down here yourself, but I don't want to delay my flight to Boston. I have important medical presentations to prepare for." Montgomery nodded, understanding the professional courtesy in her words. But he wasn't finished. "Dr. Richardson, before you go, I'd like everyone here to understand exactly who Officer Wells tried to block today." He turned to address the entire terminal. "Ladies and gentlemen," Montgomery's voice carried easily through the space, "Dr. Maya Richardson isn't just any doctor. Last year, she performed a groundbreaking surgery that made medical history. She saved countless lives that other doctors deemed hopeless cases. The research he's presenting in Boston tomorrow could change how we treat brain tumors in children." Maya stood tall as Montgomery continued, her expression modest but dignified. The young security guard, Chen, smiled proudly, glad he had stood up for what was right. Furthermore, Montgomery added, Dr. Richardson serves on the board of 3 major children's hospitals. She's turned down offers from prestigious private hospitals to continue working where she can help the most people, regardless of their ability to pay. Wells looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Jenny, the receptionist, was nodding along with Montgomery's words, while other employees looked at Maya with new respect in their eyes. Then Montgomery did something unexpected. He turned to Wells, his voice taking on a harder edge. Officer Wells, step forward. Wells moved slowly, like a man walking to his own execution. His earlier arrogance had completely vanished. I want you to apologize to Dr. Richardson, Montgomery said. Not because I'm telling you to, but because you need to understand the gravity of your actions today. Wells cleared his throat nervously. I'm sorry, Dr. Richardson. I made assumptions that were wrong. His voice was barely audible. Maya raised her hand, stopping him mid-apology. Mr. Montgomery, she said, surprising everyone, I have a better idea. She pulled out her business card and held it out to Wells, who stared at it in confusion. Next month, I'm giving a presentation at the hospital about unconscious bias in healthcare and professional settings, Maya explained, her voice clear and strong. Officer Wells, I'm inviting you to attend, not as a punishment, but as an opportunity to learn and grow. The terminal fell silent again, but this time it was a silence full of respect and admiration. Montgomery's eyebrows rose, impressed by Maya's approach. That's very kind of you, Dr. Richardson, Wells stammered, carefully taking the card as if it might burn him. It's not kindness, Maya corrected him gently. It's education, and sometimes that's more powerful than punishment. Montgomery smiled, nodding in approval. Dr. Richardson, your flight crew is ready. Allow me to escort you personally. He turned to his executives. And while I'm doing that, please begin drafting new training protocols for all our terminals. This kind of incident will not happen again. As Maya gathered her bags to follow Montgomery, the other travelers and staff broke into spontaneous applause. She had shown them how to fight discrimination not with anger, but with dignity and wisdom. The young guard, Chen, opened the door to the private flight area and whispered, Thank you for showing us a better way, Dr. Richardson. Maya smiled, knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment, it's teaching others to be better. Out on the tarmac, the morning sun made the private jet gleam like polished silver. Maya walked beside Montgomery, while behind them, the events in the terminal had set off a chain reaction. Through the large windows, they could see people making phone calls, typing on phones, and gathering in small groups to discuss what had happened. Your handling of this situation was remarkable, Montgomery said as they walked. Most people would have demanded Wells be fired on the spot. He gestured toward the jet stairs where 2 flight attendants waited with welcoming smiles. Maya adjusted her laptop bag on her shoulder. Firing one person doesn't solve the bigger problem, she replied. Besides, I've learned that sometimes the people who doubt you the most become your strongest supporters once they understand their mistakes. Just then, Maya's phone buzzed with notifications. Chen, the young security guard, had been right. The videos were already spreading online. #DeRichardson was trending, and the first news outlets were picking up the story. It seems you've started something bigger than a confrontation over flight credentials, Montgomery observed, looking at his own phone. His PR team had already sent him 5 urgent messages. Before they could reach the stairs, the terminal door burst open. Wells came running out, despite the manager trying to stop him, but this time his face showed something different, not anger or pride, but desperate realization. Dr. Richardson, wait. He called out, slightly out of breath. Please, I need to say something. Montgomery started to wave for security, but Maya held up her hand. Let him speak, she said calmly. She turned to face Wells, standing tall in her professional suit, the jet waiting behind her like a symbol of all he had tried to deny her. Wells stopped a respectful distance away. His hands were shaking slightly as he pulled out his wallet. From it, he took a worn photograph and held it out to Maya. This is my granddaughter, Sophie, he said, his voice cracking. She had brain surgery last year at Metropolitan General Hospital. I wasn't allowed to be there because of COVID restrictions, but the surgeon saved her life when everyone else said it was hopeless. Maya took the photo gently. In it, a smiling young girl with curly red hair sat in a hospital bed, giving a thumbs up to the camera. It was you, wasn't it? Wells asked quietly. You were Sophie's surgeon. I never met you. We only talked to Dr. Richardson on the phone. His voice trailed off as the full weight of his actions hit him. Maya studied the photo carefully, then smiled with recognition. Sophie Wells, age 11. Complex tumor in the temporal lobe. She loved telling jokes to the nurses and had a stuffed giraffe named Spots. Wells' eyes filled with tears. You remember her? I remember all my patients, Officer Wells, Maya said softly. Especially the brave ones like Sophie. She handed the photo back to him. How is she doing now? She's amazing. Back in school, playing soccer. Wells wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Dr. Richardson, I don't know how to apologize. I've spent all morning treating you like an imposter when you're the reason my granddaughter is alive. The small crowd that had gathered at the terminal windows watched in amazement as Maya stepped forward and placed a hand on Wells' shoulder. Sometimes life gives us chances to learn in unexpected ways, she said. I meant what I said about the presentation next month. Bring Sophie. I'd love to see her again. Montgomery, watching this scene unfold, shook his head in amazement. Dr. Richardson, you've managed to turn a potential PR nightmare into a teaching moment for everyone involved. Including me, Wells added quietly. I'll never make assumptions about anyone again. Maya checked her watch. She still had a conference to prepare for. Officer Wells, I need to go, but I expect to see you and Sophie at that presentation. We all have something to learn from each other. As Maya finally boarded the jet, Wells stood watching with Montgomery. The security guard's face showed the look of someone whose world had been completely changed in just a few hours. Sir, Wells said to Montgomery, I know I probably don't have a job anymore. Oh, you still have a job, Montgomery replied. But your new assignment is to work with our training team. Help us make sure nobody else makes the same mistake you did today. The jet's engine started up, carrying Dr. Maya Richardson toward Boston, leaving behind a changed man and a terminal full of people who had witnessed the power of dignity over discrimination. 1 month later, the Metropolitan General Hospital's main conference room was packed. Every seat was taken, and people stood along the walls, all waiting for Dr. Maya Richardson's presentation on unconscious bias in healthcare and professional settings. The incident at the private terminal had become a viral sensation, turning Maya into an unexpected symbol of grace under pressure. In the front row, Officer Thomas Wells sat nervously beside his granddaughter Sophie, her red curls bouncing as she excitedly waved to Maya on the stage. The security guard looked different now, humbler, more aware, dressed in a suit instead of his uniform. The past month had changed him in ways he never expected. Maya stood at the podium, looking elegant in a deep purple dress, her presentation slides ready behind her. The audience included hospital staff, aviation employees, corporate leaders, and even some local media. But her eyes focused on Wells and Sophie, seeing in them the perfect example of how prejudice could be transformed through understanding. Good morning, Maya began, her voice clear and confident. Today's presentation isn't about shame or blame. It's about growth. She clicked to her first slide, which showed the viral video from the terminal. Many people in the audience shifted uncomfortably, including Wells. What happened that morning could have ended many ways, Maya continued. I could have demanded someone be fired. People could have just recorded another viral video of discrimination and moved on. Instead, something remarkable happened. She gestured to Wells and Sophie. Would you both please stand up? Wells stood slowly, helping Sophie up beside him. The young girl beamed at the crowd, while her grandfather's face showed a mix of embarrassment and determination. Officer Wells didn't know it that morning, but he had met me before, through a phone call when his granddaughter needed complex brain surgery. Maya smiled at Sophie. And now, he's helping Elite Airways redesign their entire security training program, focusing on treating every passenger with respect regardless of their appearance. The audience murmured in surprise. Wells had indeed spent the past month working with Montgomery's team, sharing his story and helping create new guidelines that would prevent similar incidents. But the story gets better, Maya continued. Sophie, would you like to tell everyone your news? Sophie grabbed the microphone from the podium, her excitement impossible to contain. I'm going to be a doctor like Dr. Richardson. she announced proudly. "And Grandpa's going to help me study." The audience broke into applause and laughter. Wells wiped tears from his eyes as he hugged his granddaughter. The security guard who had once tried to block Maya from a plane was now supporting his granddaughter's dreams of following in Maya's footsteps. Maya raised her hand for quiet. "This is what change looks like," she said. "It's not just about policies or procedures. It's about opening our hearts to recognize our biases and actively working to overcome them." She clicked to the next slide, showing statistics about discrimination in various professional settings. Since that morning at the terminal, Elite Airways has implemented new training programs at all their locations. 3 other airlines have adopted similar policies. More importantly, people are talking about these issues openly, honestly, and with a desire to learn. Wells raised his hand to speak. Maya nodded, and he turned to face the audience. "A month ago, I was the problem," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I let my prejudices blind me to the amazing person standing right in front of me. But Dr. Richardson showed me that change is possible if we're willing to learn." Sophie hugged her grandfather tightly as the audience applauded again. In the back of the room, Richard Montgomery nodded in approval, while James Harrison smiled proudly at his head of neurosurgery. Maya concluded her presentation with a final thought. "We can't change the past, but we can learn from it. Every interaction is a chance to either build walls or break them down. The choice is ours." As the audience rose for a standing ovation, Sophie ran up to the stage and handed Maya a card. Inside was a drawing of 2 figures in doctors' coats, one tall, one small, with the words "My Hero" written in a child's handwriting. The story of the racist guard and the black doctor had transformed into something more powerful, a lesson about redemption, growth, and the power of choosing understanding over anger. As Maya hugged Sophie, she knew that sometimes the biggest victories come not from defeating your opponents, but from turning them into allies. 6 months after the incident at the private terminal, Dr. Maya Richardson stood in her office at Metropolitan General Hospital, looking at the wall of changes her experience had created. News articles, photos, and thank you letters covered a large bulletin board, not just about her medical achievements anymore, but about something bigger. The viral video of that morning had gotten over 10 million views, but what happened afterward was even more important. Maya picked up a framed magazine cover from her desk. She was on the front of Time magazine, under the headline, "The Power of Grace." How one doctor changed corporate America's conversation about bias. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Wells. He had sent a photo of Sophie giving a presentation at her school's career day, wearing a white doctor's coat that Maya had given her. She got an A+. The message read, "Thank you for believing in change." Maya smiled, remembering how different Wells had been 6 months ago. Now he traveled around the country, speaking at security training programs about his experience. His story of transformation was powerful precisely because he admitted his mistakes so honestly. A knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. It was Richard Montgomery, the airline owner, and James Harrison, the hospital board chairman. They carried folders and wore excited expressions. "Dr. Richardson," Montgomery said, "we've got some amazing news. The training program you helped develop with Officer Wells has been adopted by every major airline in the country. The numbers are in from the first 3 months." Harrison opened one of the folders. "Complaints about discriminatory treatment at airports are down 60%. Employee satisfaction is up. And best of all, other industries are asking to adapt the program for their needs." Maya sat down at her desk, taking in the information. What had started as one bad morning had sparked a nationwide conversation about treating people with dignity and respect. "There's more," Montgomery added. "Remember that young security guard, David Chen, the one who stood up for you that day? He's now heading our diversity training division. He's doing an incredible job." Just then, Maya's office door burst open. Sophie Wells ran in, her red curls flying, followed by her slightly out-of-breath grandfather. She was carrying a paper with a big red A+ on top. "Dr. Richardson, look." Sophie waved her science test excitedly. "I got the highest grade in class on the brain anatomy test. Grandpa helped me study, and I remembered everything you taught me when I visited the hospital last week." Wells stood in the doorway, smiling proudly at his granddaughter. He looked years younger than he had that morning at the terminal, as if the weight of prejudice had been lifting him down without him knowing it. "That's wonderful, Sophie," Maya said, giving the girl a high five. Keep studying hard, and in about 15 years, we might be colleagues. Montgomery watched this interaction with satisfaction. Dr. Richardson, we've created something remarkable here. A month ago, the governor's office called. They want to implement similar training programs in all state offices. And 3 other hospital networks have contacted us about adopting our new bias training protocols, Harrison added. You've started a movement, Maya. Maya looked around her office, at Sophie excitedly showing her test to everyone, at Wells beaming with pride, at the pile of letters from people sharing their own stories of facing and overcoming prejudice. She thought about how differently things could have gone that morning if she had responded with anger instead of dignity. We've all started this movement, she corrected gently. Change happens when we choose to be better, to learn from our mistakes, and to help others learn too. Sophie tugged at Maya's sleeve. Can I show them my special project? At Maya's nod, she pulled out a carefully drawn picture from her backpack. It showed 2 figures in doctor's coats, one tall, one small, standing in front of a hospital. Written across the top were the words, "Anyone can be amazing." As Maya hung Sophie's drawing on her bulletin board, she realized that sometimes the biggest victories don't come from winning fights, but from changing hearts. The incident that could have been just another viral video about racism had instead become a story of transformation, hope, and the power of choosing understanding over anger. Wells touched the drawing gently. You know, he said quietly, that morning at the terminal was the worst mistake of my life, but it led to the best changes I've ever made. Maya smiled at him. That's the thing about mistakes, she said. They're only failures if we don't learn from them. Otherwise, they're just the beginning of a better story.